Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. My name is Grimberg Golijov, and I'm the Human Rights, Law, and Research Officer at the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, JIJ. The Jerusalem Institute of Justice has been hosting weekly webinars to provide updates on the current situation, and we are delighted to collaborate with ALMA for this special webinar, focusing on the UN under the spotlight, rethinking its role in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. The Jerusalem Institute of Justice is an Israeli legal and research institute that holds special consultative status at the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, ECOSOC, for its contribution to the promotion and protection of human rights in our region. JIJ is committed to improving the rights and quality of life of individuals in Israel and the Middle East. Established in 2004, JIJ operates both internationally and domestically. JIJ's International Law and Public Diplomacy Department stands at the forefront of Israel's struggles to maintain its standing in the international community. We use the legal and advocacy tools at our disposal in order to confront the most complex issues. In line with our dedication to collaborative initiatives promoting awareness and respect for international law, JIJ has partnered with ALMA, the Association for the Promotion of International Humanitarian Law, to co-host this insightful webinar. ALMA, established in 2010, is an apolitical non-profit association dedicated to enhancing awareness of international humanitarian law, IHL. ALMA's primary goal is to make IHL knowledge accessible to all and to nurture discussions on its significance and practicality. I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished speakers, Professor Yuval Shany and Ambassador Meirav Eilon Shahar. Thank you for joining us today. Ambassador Meirav Eilon Shahar was appointed permanent representative of Israel to the United Nations and international organizations in Geneva in August 2020. Prior to this mission, she served as Deputy Director General for Coordination and Policy Planning between 2017 and 2020, and as Israel's ambassador to Vietnam between 2012 and July 2017. Joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1995, Meirav Eilon Shahar has represented Israel in a number of different capacities. Until summer 2012, she directed the Department for United Nations Political Affairs in Jerusalem after returning from New York, where she served as counselor at the Permanent Mission of Israel to the United Nations. Previously, Ms. Eilon Shahar served as Consul for Communications and Public Affairs at the Consulate General of Israel in Los Angeles from 2000 to 2002. There, she directed public, media, and academic affairs in the southwestern United States. She also served as Second Secretary and Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of Israel in Nairobi, Kenya, between 1997 and 2000. In this capacity, she oversaw all aspects of bilateral relations between Israel and 6 East African countries. Born in Ramat Gan, Israel, on 12 September 1969, she served in the Israel Defense Forces for 2 years, after which she earned a dual degree in political science and cinema and communications from the Tel Aviv University. In the following years, Ms. Eilon Shahar completed her master's in public policy and administration from the Tel Aviv University. Ms. Eilon Shahar is married with 3 children. Professor Yuval Shany is the Herz Lauterbach Chair in International Law and former Dean of the Law Faculty of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He was a member of the UN Human Rights Committee from 2013 to 2020, and he served for 1 year during that time as chair of the committee. He currently serves as a senior research fellow at the Israeli Democracy Institute, the chair of the Hebrew University's Minerva Center for Human Rights Academic Committee, co-director of the faculty's International Law Forum, and the head of the Cyber Law Program of the Hebrew University Cybersecurity Research Center. His research focuses on international human rights law, international humanitarian law, international courts and tribunals, and international law in cyberspace. Today, we will discuss the recent and ongoing events that have taken place in Israel in the last weeks. As you probably know, on October 7th, Hamas terrorists launched a brutal attack in Israel, marking one of the darkest days for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. After 23 days, 239 individuals are still held hostage in Gaza. Over 5,300 people have been injured, More than 1,400 lives have been lost, and 8,000 rockets have been launched into Israel from the Gaza Strip. With the vast experience of our speakers, and in light of the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas, it is crucial to examine the impact of these events on the relationship between Israel and the United Nations. I will now proceed to ask some questions to our speakers, and following that, we will open the floor for a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session where you can leave all your questions in the Q&A section below in the Zoom. My first question is to both of you. So as we know, the United Nations is an intergovernmental organization whose purpose is to maintain international peace and security. We know that historically, the relation between Israel and the UN is rather a complex one. So how do you see the relevance of Israel and UN relations in the current context, and how has the recent conflict with Hamas affected the dynamics between Israel and the United Nations? Ambassador Meirav, you can please answer.
Thank you, and good evening, and thank you, Carolina, for inviting me. Indeed, the relations between Israel and the United Nations throughout the years has been complex is a very a mild word. It's been a difficult journey on one hand, but I have to say that in recent years, Israel invested many efforts in integrating into the larger work of the United Nations, into the global issues, whether it's any issue, women status, whether it's incitement, whether it's everything you can think, sustainable development goals, because we thought that's the right thing. We wanted to be part and parcel. We still do want to be part of the global world. There are things that you cannot tackle on your own, whether it's food security, climate change. There are many, many things that, and I'm a true multilateralist. So I thought of myself for many, many years, I have to say. And I also advocated for this approach also when I served in New York and when I served in Israel, because there are challenges. We need to be part and parcel of the international global world and confront the different challenges together. But I have to say that the massacre of October 7th is testing this very drastically. It is indeed the UN, or the multilateral system, is an intergovernmental system, but you still have institutions that are led, whether it's the UN by the Secretary General, whether it's the WHO that is led by Dr. Tedros. So you have heads of institutions that you expect, and I expected personally, that would understand what has happened, the tragedy that Israel went through on October 7th. Not only understand, but also acknowledge it. Acknowledge publicly, meaning condemning Hamas as a terrorist organization, understanding and advocating for Israel's right to defend itself, like the world did when it was ISIS. There was an international coalition to defeat evil, to defeat terrorist organization. And Hamas is no different. But I have to say that since October 7th, we've been, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but I have to say that the people of Israel have been let down by the international institution. There's no other way in my mind to say it. The people of Israel have been let down. First, on their understanding of what happened in Israel, the condemnation, the actions, and I have to say we will need to say where we take it from here. But you have every institution, basically. It's not only the big institutions. You know, for example, we've heard, and there are clear evidence of women that were raped, brutally raped. There is evidence. There is no single UN apparatus that has bothered to condemn it, to say something about it, to acknowledge it. How can it be? How can something like that happen? So I have to say that Where we go from here remains to be seen. We're still we're right now in a war that was imposed on us, and this is something that we need to win, the war against Hamas. We are working with the international organizations and the different humanitarian organizations on the ground. It's not that we're not working with them. We continue to work with them, whether it's OCHA or WHO or ICRC and so on, because we want to provide humanitarian assistance to the civilians in Gaza. We're working, of course, with the ICRC when it comes to the hostages held in Gaza. And we are thankful for all that the ICRC is doing. Hopefully that Hamas actually will allow access and communication, which they haven't done so far. So we are continuing to work. But when you look at the political level of the international organizations, from the United Nations Secretary General, that spoke about the fact that he condemned it, but it did not happen in a vacuum. And there is no excuse for that, because there is no justification whatsoever to what happened on October 7th. So when I'm looking at the political level of the United Nations, of the multilateral organizations, they've let down the people of Israel.
Thank you, Meirav, for your answer. Professor Yuval, if you could also answer the question.
Yeah, so I don't disagree much with Ambassador Eilon Shahar in the sense that the relationship has been difficult for many, many years. A major source of difficulty is the fact that the UN is an interstate organization, and there is an automatic majority which is level stacked against Israel on many issues relating to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which simply has to do with the composition of the United Nations and the way in which the different regional blocs and political blocs align themselves. And I think that the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very much central to the way in which the UN is regarding the state of Israel. And it's a conflict which has been pending before the United Nations almost from the day the United Nations had been created. And there had been extensive creation of institutions around this. So this is not just one of these conflicts with regard to which the UN sometimes deals with and then stops dealing this. This has been really this conflict, and positions regarding the conflict have been also institutionalized. So we have UNRWA. We have a permanent committee on the realization of the self-determination, the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. And I think that this is something which runs very deep both in the interstate, but also to some extent in the professional side of the organization, which is is involved in this conflict and has a certain position and approach towards this conflict. I think I also agree with Ambassador Eilon Shahar that there have been some improvement in recent years, generally in Israel-UN relations, that may have to do with the reduced centrality of the Palestinian conflict on the global agenda, because maybe other conflicts took a more prominent place on the global agenda. I think the Abraham Accords were also an important development that allowed Israel to create new partnerships, new initiatives, and to somewhat break the mold of existing relations between it and UN membership. But I think the recent conflict is pushing us back into an old familiar framework and configuration of votes and of positions, and Israel is disappointed, and I think rightfully, that that there is reluctance to treat Hamas as if it was ISIS or Al Qaeda or a terror organization. And I think that this stems from the ambivalence of many member states towards how such an approach would affect their traditional positions on the Palestinian issues. And it seems that the sentiment, the pro-Palestinian sentiment, is winning the day, and is in a way rendering both the political but also the professional, many of the professional agencies either downplaying the Israeli victimhood and the Israeli the grievances that Israel holds, or trying to create some sort of equivalence or balancing between the two on the one hand, on the other hand, which is in a way a failure to capture what had happened at the time. But of course, as time continues and the pendulum swings of general public opinion, I imagine that we will see more and more hostility aimed towards Israel in both professional and political UN bodies.
Thank you, Yuval. Now that we talked a bit in general terms regarding the UN and Israel, I wanted to ask you, Professor Shany, with your experience as a former member and chair of the Human Rights Committee, which is one of the UN treaty bodies responsible for monitoring the implementation of international human rights treaties, can you provide some insights into the effectiveness of these treaty bodies in enforcing their mandates in the context of the current situation?
Yeah, well, the UN human rights apparatus is roughly divided into two parts. There are treaty bodies which are expert-driven, and they work to implement specific treaties. And then there are special procedures that operate under the auspices of the Human Rights Council, and they tend to be more hands-on with regard to specific developments. By and large, treaty bodies such as the Human Rights Committee, on which I sat, is not very effective in dealing with specific emergencies. They are not permanent bodies. They do not convene around the year in Geneva. And even when they convene, they're essentially, their task is to review on a periodic basis reports by states. They don't have the capacity and also don't have the procedures to act as a speedy response apparatus. Those treaty bodies that try to do this in the current conflict, I have generated policy statements or statements that were somewhat either partial or weak or unsatisfactory. Which has to do maybe with issues relating to their composition or expertise, but also because they, in my opinion, they lack the tools to effectively intervene. I would note that the Human Rights Committee did not issue any statement because it's not the policy of that body. That might change, but for the time being, I understand that the sentiment is not to issue a statement. The special procedures is another thing, and there we have seen many statements. Essentially, the special procedures, the special rapporteurs, the working groups are better situated to address urgent developments. But they suffer from other problems. They don't have sometimes resources. Sometimes they're politically biased. Sometimes they, in terms of professional engagement, their ability to actually familiarize themselves with conditions on the ground before issuing statements is sometimes limited. So on the whole, I think that the system has not been, the performance of the UN human rights system in this regard has not been very helpful or very useful.
Thank you. And to you, Ambassador Eilon Shahar, in your task, you operate with other UN bodies like the Human Rights Council, which sits in Geneva. So how do you see their role and influence in the ongoing situation, and also if you could provide more detail on the Israeli mission to the UN in Geneva and its approach to engaging with the UN.
Well, the Human Rights Council, since its inception in 2006, have been very biased, I have to say. When you look at the agenda of the council, you have one item that deals with all situations around the world, whether it's Iran or Syria or, I don't know, Chad or Ethiopia. But since its inception, they've created a special item, a permanent item, item 7, to deal with the Palestinian issue. So first of all, that's, inherently and institutionally, it's a bias because it means you deal with the Palestinian issue every time the council meets. More than that, and let's not forget, because the Human Rights Council is a member state driven, its composition is 47 countries. And simply put it, you have numerous resolutions throughout the years, and it's similar to the General Assembly. Israel never has the majority to defeat any of those very, very one-sided and biased resolutions. So over the years, the Human Rights Council has created different mechanisms. So it's not only the agenda item that's singling out Israel. They've created, for example, a special rapporteur only on the Palestinian territory that is open-ended mandate, and it's there forever. The Human Rights Council has created, for example, the Commission of Inquiry in May 21. Usually, Commission of Inquiries are there for a year. They can be extended, but the Council reviews their mandate. So that commission was created with an open-ended mandate. It's there forever, and it's a very wide mandate, not to mention about the composition. So over the years, you have layers and layers of different instruments that the Human Rights Council created, which have continued to single out Israel in a disproportionate way, I have to say, and that's once again mild. So to say that, first of all, they have not met on the current situation, because the council is not sitting right now. There is always the ability to call for an emergency session, a special session. But I have to say that judging from past experience and the bias and the very one-sided approach to Israel, justice will not be served there, not towards Israel. Let's put it this way. It might be called by others at a later stage, very soon. It can be next week even. But unfortunately, I don't expect that the Israeli victims of October 7th will get any justice there, as they did not get at the General Assembly, I have to say. As I said, on Friday, you had a resolution of the General Assembly that passed with a majority, overwhelming majority of 120, only 14 opposed. And there is no mentioning of October 7th. There's no mentioning of Hamas being a terrorist organization, the atrocities they committed. There is no call for the release of the hostages. We have 239 hostages. There is nothing there, but still 120 countries voted for a resolution that was led by Jordan, by the Arab group. So that's what I think about the Human Rights Council, and whether it will serve the citizens of Israel any justice. It will not. Regarding our engagement, as I said, there is pre-October 7th, which we did work with the different mechanisms, including with the Human Rights Council, including having an Israeli resolution there on cyberbullying, for example, because we worked on global agenda. But I have to say that since October 7th, of course, everything we do is concentrating on the war that was imposed on us, whether it's the Office of the High Commissioner, whether it's WHO, whether it's telecommunication, whether it's ICRC. It's the different organizations that work here, and they have relevancy to the issues in Israel. We've had, whether it's exchange, it's letters, meeting with ambassadors, explaining what's happening, and also working with the families of the hostages that have already visited here in Geneva. They come to Geneva because they want their voice to be heard here. They want to meet with the ICRC, and they have met. They want to meet with other relevant actors, whether it's the High Commissioner for Human Rights, although his mandate is very different, or WHO, although their mandate is very different. But they will meet, and rightly so, with everyone who will hear them, because they want their loved ones to be home as soon as possible, and so do we. And this is what we've been doing. We're been basically giving a voice to the hostages that cannot speak for themselves, and maintaining it on global agenda, because this is a demand that the ICRC will be given access to the hostages to see what's their situation, and the demand, of course, for their immediate release. So this is really what we're working on.
Thank you. So, Ambassador Meirav, you mentioned actually the recent resolution passed by the UN General Assembly, and I actually wanted to ask you first, Professor Shany. So this resolution called for a humanitarian truce, and the resolution omitted any reference to Israel's right to self-defense regarding October 7th attack by Hamas. So how do you interpret the absence of such a mention in the resolution and its implications? And does Israel have a right to defend itself?
Well, the right to self-defense is found in the Charter. I mean, you don't need the General Assembly. The General Assembly doesn't have the legal authority to suspend the right to self-defense under the Charter. There is some specific legal analysis as to when did the conflict with Hamas start. So one could say that since Israel has already been in a conflict with Hamas since 2007, it doesn't really need to re-invoke. So the right to self-defense has been there all along, so we didn't need to re-invoke a right that already existed. There are also some quibbles as to whether whether the Charter applies with regard to a non-state actor, not only in interstate relations, but these are quibbles because under whichever construction you develop, it is impossible to deny that a state that had been attacked in this magnitude has an inherent right to self-defense. I mean, there are different ways to construct it, be that under customary international law, or like I said, be that in continuation to an existing state of armed conflict. But I don't think that the question of the right to self-defense is in and itself in doubt. It is unfortunate that the General Assembly didn't indicate so, but I don't think that this has legal significance that would actually affect Israel's right to exercise force. And there haven't been in the interstate level many serious voices that have cast doubt on this. So Israel, there have been actually a number of statements by allies of Israel that supported its right to self-defense.
Thank you. And well, this same resolution also does not mention Hamas even once throughout the entire text. And the UN doesn't even designate Hamas as a terrorist organization, unlike the US or the European Union. So this question is to you, Ambassador Eilon Shahar. Why do you think the UN has not designated Hamas as a terrorist organization, and what are the implications of this decision?
Well, first I'll say that in the General Assembly resolution, there was an attempt by Canada to introduce an amendment that did speak about the atrocities of October 7th, about Hamas as a terrorist organization, was defeated, was not included. So just imagine, it is an intergovernmental body that cannot bring itself actually to acknowledge a very simple truth, a fact, that the resolution could have passed with it. It would have been a declarative because it's a General Assembly resolution. It doesn't have any force, but it would have been an important step on world stage to acknowledge that Hamas is a terrorist organization and that and the atrocities is a geopolitical place where you have different actors, and that's why the United Nations hasn't designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. Have you seen Russia acknowledging that Hamas is a terrorist organization? No. Have you seen China acknowledging it? No. If anything, Russia just hosted the leaders of Hamas. So this is part of the issue. That's part of the problem. What we're trying to do, since the United Nations is not able to do so, is to work in hand and but there are many more that have not done so. And we believe that they should do it on a national level until we're able to do it on world stage, like the UN. So this is very, very disheartening, I have to say, because, you know, when you talk to people about ISIS, there was the coalition, international coalition to defeat ISIS. There was the understanding. Examples like Boko Haram, there is the international understanding that it's a terrorist organization and it must be defeated and it must be designated. And on Hamas, unfortunately, not everybody sees it or understands it like that.
Thank you. So we talked about the fact that the UN is an interstate organization, and it's worth noting that what is in the UN, the state of Palestine, holds a unique status as a non-member observer state, and it has actually ratified several international treaties committing itself to comply with human rights. In contrast, as we said, Hamas is not a recognized state. It functions as the de facto governing authority in the Gaza Strip. So, Professor Shany, given this complex situation, could you provide some insights into whether Hamas, as a non-state actor, is bound by international legal norms? Has Hamas committed violations of international law?
Yes, thank you. So there are some clearly there are some norms that are applicable also to an organization like Hamas. First, international humanitarian law has a very developed body of norms that apply in what are called non-international armed conflicts. And they are designed specifically to regulate situations like this one when a state is involved in an armed conflict with a group that is not a state. It could be a terror organization, or it could be rebels, or it could be another armed militia. And obviously the Hamas attacks directed specifically against civilians on 7 October, but also the continuous and unceasing shooting at rockets, which I just saw that there, even in last few minutes, there have been rockets shot in the direction of Israel. This is also a violation of IHL, of the rules of humanitarian law, because these are cases of indiscriminate targeting. It's targeting that is not directed at military targets, which is the only permissible target in a military confrontation, and therefore there is no question that the atrocities of October 7, but also other acts by Hamas later on violated IHL. There is also no question that they also violate another body of norms, and that is international criminal law. And we've already heard the ICC prosecutor stating that his office has jurisdiction to investigate the crimes committed by Hamas, and that including crimes that are committed in Israel. And I think it is quite clear that what happened on October 7 is both a set of war crimes and crimes against humanity, possibly even the crime of genocide. So this is another level in which Hamas would bear, and specific Hamas actors would bear responsibility under international law. And finally, there are also certain human rights norms, core human rights norms, in which there is general acceptance among international scholars, but also UN bodies, that they also apply with regard to groups such as Hamas that have a territorial control over an area. And those norms have also been very gravely breached through the attack. So while it is not a state, it is not an entity that is free to respect basic rules of international law, not to speak basic rules of morality.
Thank you. And one of the acts committed by Hamas, it's the hostage taking. As we said before, there are currently 239 individuals being held hostage in the Gaza Strip. So Ambassador Eilon Shahar, you mentioned, for instance, the ICRC and other bodies and how you are working with the families of the hostages. So can you specify a bit on which are the mechanisms in this case available to the UN with regards of the release of the hostages, and do you think the UN is or will enforce such mechanisms?
Well, the ICRC is entrusted, its mandate is actually the humanitarian mandate, is indeed to visit hostages, and that's why we are mainly approaching them. Also in Israel and here, and that's why the families, they have been in touch with the families both here and in Israel. And the ICRC has different ways of working. Mostly they don't speak about it, but they're working with all the different actors that have influence on the ground to see what information they can actually receive and what access they will be allowed to. The ICRC, of course, has also bringing humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza through the Rafah crossings. But I have to say that there are many UN organizations or multilateral organizations that are working on the ground in Gaza, whether it's the Office of the High Commissioner, whether it's the WHO, whether it's UNRWA. So I believe it's maybe even if it's not in their mandate, that it's their duty that every information, every contact, every piece of information that they can provide is crucial. Whether they do so or not, that's a different story. To be very frank, you have OCHA working there, the humanitarian. You have many people, many humanitarian workers that are on the ground. I personally believe that they do hear things. The question if they actually do something with it or not. But the mandate mostly is the ICRC mandate, actually, to approach the sides, to approach Hamas, to ask for access, which they have not been granted so far, to ask for conditions, to create contact, and to demand the release, of course. We have seen the ICRC in action in the 4 hostages that were released. We had 2 Israeli Americans, and 2 Israelis that were released later. And we've seen that Hamas handed them over to ICRC officials on the ground, and they handed them over to the Israeli authorities. But
Ambassador Eilon Shahar is. Oh. No, you're in. Yeah.
I lost you for a second, but I just wanted to say that what we are expecting and demanding is news and information as soon as possible, because we are more than 3 weeks that the hostages are there. We're talking, as I said before, and if I didn't, then I'll say that out of the 239, we're talking about 33 children and babies. The youngest is only 9 months old. And we're talking about many elderly people as well. And we have no idea what's their condition. And imagine them being there, kids without parents and parents without children. It's really heartbreaking.
Yes. So before I proceed to the Q&A section that we already have many questions from the participants, I would like to ask you both, what message would you like to convey to our audience about the future of the relationship between Israel and the United Nations? So Professor Shany.
Well, I mean, there is of course, I think, an interest both for the UN and for Israel to find ways to work together. Like you said in the beginning, the UN is an organization that that its mandate is mainly to maintain international peace and security. Israel is an important actor in an important region, and it would be, of course, difficult for the UN to maintain its mandate without actually working with a country like Israel. But I think what's at stake here is not only the question of the bilateral Israeli-UN relations or the broader multilateral relations between Israel and its neighbors. I think what we are currently, the crisis that we are currently find ourselves in is really raises deeper questions about global order, whether the UN could actually impose its international law on terrorist groups that have been in the last 40 years, almost 40 years since the early 90s, in the business of basically derailing any possibility for reconciliation and peace between Israel and its neighbors, and specifically with the Palestinians. And I think this is really a test for the international structures of peace and security, whether they can address the legitimate concerns of a state that has been subject to a very savage attack by a terror group, or whether it will be simply taken hostage, so to speak, by the politics of the organization, that push in a direction of a much weaker response, would push Israel and other countries to opt for a much more moderate and weak response that would not address the problem, would not address its root causes, and would not actually uphold international law. So I think this is over and beyond the Israeli-UN relationship. This is really a testing moment for the so-called international community. Can it get its act together?
Thank you. Ambassador Eilon Shahar.
Well, I would like to agree with Professor Shany. I think it is a test for the international multilateral system. I spoke before about the hostages and the ICRC. I think it's also a test for the ICRC. I mean, it's great to have an organization that has a mandate, humanitarian mandate. The question is if they are able to carry it out, actually to carry it out or not. That's a question. So it's a test. It's a test for them, for the international community. And I agree. And also with regard to Israel, and I have to say, and I've said it before, that in Israel, we feel that the UN and the international apparatus has let the people of Israel down. And I try, whenever I'm asked about the future relations, to say that at this point, we're very angry. It's not a good time, actually, to make harsh and tough decisions, but we will certainly, after the war, right now, we are concentrating on winning the war against Hamas, because no country will allow a terrorist organization on its border. If we want to rebuild the kibbutz and the villages in the south of Israel, we need to guarantee safety and security to the people of Israel. And to do that, we must dismantle the military capabilities of Hamas. Otherwise, we've seen what they can do. It's not a theory. We know what they can do, whether I believe that we will need to reassess after we have won this war that was waged on us. We will need to reassess how do we go from here? How do we go from here?
Thank you. So we've received many questions from the audience. I will read some of them because I'm not sure we will have time to go through all of them. So one question, it says, the UN Commission of Inquiry on the OPT and Israel issued a statement on 10th of October condemning Hamas and stating that it's opening an investigation focusing on international crimes, including those committed by Hamas. It is the only UN body with a mandate to conduct such an investigation into Hamas crimes and to provide its findings to the International Criminal Court and other judicial bodies. Such an investigation seems to align with Israel's interest in acknowledging the horrific crimes and promoting international justice. So the question is, will Israel cooperate with this commission? Ambassador Eilon Shahar.
Well, first we have to remember this commission, as I said, was created in May 21. This is a commission we have not cooperated with so far. And the reason is because the mandate was very problematic to start with. And the people, the commissioners that were nominated, the 3 commissioners, are people that their opinion about Israel is well known, it's very well documented. Usually when you establish a commission, I've seen it on Russia, on the Ukraine situation, and others, you take impartial people to lead them. But here, it seems like it was done the opposite. The only people that were chosen were people that had a firm opinion against Israel for many, many years, and it's all very well documented, whether they see us as an apartheid state, as what we are doing to the Palestinians is ethnic cleansing, and there have been anti-Semitic remarks as well. So these are the people that are leading the commission. This commission has been discredited not only by us, but by some of our colleagues in the West as well, because of what I've said. Now, the commission has issued what it issued, but I urge the person who asked it also to listen very carefully. A week ago, they also presented the report. There was a press conference. They presented the report before the General Assembly, the 3rd committee. And once again, you know, they spoke about it, but then immediately they said it's within the context. It's because it's related to the Israeli conflict, justifying in a sense, giving an excuse to why the atrocities of October 7th happened. What wasn't said also that on the 7th of October, to my understanding, the COI established 2 inquiries. One is to look into the crimes against Israel, but also one to look into the crimes committed by Israel against the Palestinians. I have to say that's very interesting because on the 7th of October, you know, there was no retaliation, neither on the 8th. You know, Israel was in shock on the 9th. It took time. So it's very interesting to establish the same day 2 inquiries, I have to say. And from everything I know about this commission and the people leading it, it doesn't give me any confidence that the victims in Israel, and that's what we have to remember, we're seeking justice to the victims in Israel, the 1,400 people that were butchered, the more than 5,000 people that were injured, 239 people that were kidnapped, babies and women and men. And that's what we're seeking. The question if the COI will give justice. No, I'm very firm that it will not. From everything I've read, from everything they've said since the 7th of October, because it's always in the context, and I have to say that there is nothing that justifies the butchering of 1,400 people. So there will be other venues for justice, but the COI will not be it.
Thank you. Professor Shany, this is another question, stated that the crimes committed by Hamas may potentially amount to the crime of genocide. So could you please provide more details about this claim?
Well, the crime of genocide is a crime that occurs when a group or part of a group that is defined as a religious, ethnic, or national group is being targeted by certain crimes, which could include murder or displacement or other crimes. The critical aspect in cases involving allegations of genocide is really the question of intent, whether the crimes directed against the group were committed with an intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. And we do have precedent in other cases, for instance, in cases involving the former Yugoslavia, where international courts have held that ethnic cleansing in a certain region of Bosnia, for instance, could amount to a crime of genocide. It is possible that the same construction would apply here because it seems that the operation that the Hamas engaged in on October 7th was aimed to destroy the population of a certain region, which is adjacent to the Gaza Strip. It is also quite clear that the ideology of Hamas is an ideology that is set on destroying not only Israelis but also Jews and Zionists, and this is something which the Hamas Charter provides. And the combination of this ideology and the actions and their consequences could conceivably result in the commission of genocide. I would say that crimes against humanity or war crimes are also very serious crimes. So it's not necessary in all cases to reach also the level of genocide, but there are elements in the crimes of October 7th that would seem to meet international definitions for the crime of genocide.
Thank you. So here's another question regarding the resolution that we discussed about that was passed by the General Assembly. So for Ambassador Eilon Shahar, as you mentioned, there was a very general resolution that emphasized the humanitarian considerations. Yet there were fairly high numbers of abstainees for that kind of resolution. Looking at the list of abstainees, we can find some surprising names. How do you see this? Do you think this is significant?
You can find very surprising names also in those who voted for. For me, the fact that France voted for a resolution hostages held in Gaza, that's a surprise. Yes, the fact that Germany abstained on such a resolution, that's and they wanted to push for it, but once it failed, they should not have supported such a resolution. So there are other surprises. Some I'm less surprised, unfortunately, being in the multilateral arena and seeing the voting patterns over the years. But these are two examples that I'm surprised. And there are others.
Thank you. Yes. So here's a question to both of you. So what do you think, or what are your concerns regarding UNRWA? And if you can provide some details, Professor Shany.
Sorry. With regard to UNRWA, Israel has there are long-standing issues with regard to UNRWA. I'm not sure that the question was directed with regard to the specific conduct of UNRWA in this conflict, but I think there is a general concern in UNRWA, first regarding the question of the mandate of UNRWA and how long is UNRWA and the idea of refugee status, which is being transferred from generation to generation to generation. I think this is a traditional concern that Israel has, that UNRWA in a way is maybe part of the problem and not necessarily part of the solution. On the other hand, Israel has cooperated over the years with UNRWA on a more pragmatic level, seeing it as an important aspect in a configuration that was designed to prevent a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. A second set of concerns with UNRWA has to, I think, to do with the relationship between UNRWA and Hamas. To what extent is UNRWA pushing back against Hamas, or to what extent is UNRWA unable to actually to do that? There have been, I think, in the recent conflict, there have been some allegations that UNRWA made and then retracted about having some of its some of its fuel reserves being confiscated by Hamas operatives. There are also broader concerns which UNRWA has dealt with to some extent regarding UNRWA schools and the curriculum, and some statements attributed. So I would say that on the whole, this idea of having a refugee agency that is has been so long in the area and so embedded in the population is in a way, I think, putting the idea that that an international humanitarian agency has to be at some level impartial and objective, puts it under considerable stress. So I think this is at the heart of the Israeli reservations directed at the UNRWA.
Thank you. And Ambassador Eilon Shahar, what do you think about this question?
I think Professor Shany has outlined our concerns very well, I have to say. There are concerns with the fact that UNRWA is perpetuating the problem by the fact that, when you look at UNHCR, their mandate is actually to resettle. And the number of refugees with UNRWA only grows tremendously over the years. And there is no way out. So that's why Israel many times sees it as part of the problem. The fact that, there's no end. We started with a certain amount. Today we're talking about more than 4 million, and then the next decade we'll talk about more millions. So that's the issue. The other issue is indeed the fact that they are part of the Palestinian population. Their teachers come from the Palestinians. And we have seen in the past Hamas using UNRWA school, like they use hospitals, like they use other civilian infrastructure to launch from there. And the question is how much UNRWA knows and how much they are willing to reveal. There's always this. And of course, the textbooks that they've been teaching over the years, which is also a big problem, and doesn't really teach, let's put it mildly, doesn't advocate and teach for coexistence. And it also remains an issue as well. But it's also true that we have been on a practical level, and I did it also in one of my previous positions. We are working with them and cooperating with them. Not to say that these concerns don't exist. They do. They do.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we're out of time, and we had many questions left. So if anyone in the audience wants to send us an email to JIJ, and we will pass them on. So to conclude this webinar, I wanted to express my gratitude to our distinguished speakers, Professor Yuval Shany and Ambassador Meirav Eilon Shahar, for your invaluable insights and expertise. And I would also like to thank our audience for their active participation and thoughtful questions. The Israeli-Hamas conflict is a multifaceted issue, and our discussion today, I think it has provided some deeper understanding of the complexities involved. So I want to thank you all for being a part of this important conversation, and we will see you all in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.